Good day, sir. My name is Julie Fitzluza from BL Psychology 3D. For today's discussion is all about research methods in psychopathology. First is science and scientific methods. Science, the systematic pursuit of knowledge through observation. Scientists gather data to set theories. Science is a way of knowing unlike normal everyday ways of knowing. It values empiricism, objectivity, and replicability, and demands rigorous standards of proofs. Science is a means of testing hypotheses and theoretical claims. Next is theory. Theory is a set of propositions developed to explain what is observed. It is a good theory if it is falsifiable and allows for disconfirmation. Next is hypothesis. Specific predictions about what will occur if a theory is correct. Next is research methods in psychotherapy. First is the case study. It is the collection of detailed biographical information. Its evaluation is it is excellent source of hypothesis, can provide information about novel case of procedures, and it cannot provide causal evidences because it cannot rule out alternative hypotheses. Case study is an extensive observation and detailed description of a client. It provides a rich description of a clinical phenomenon and disprove an allegedly universal hypothesis, also generates hypotheses that can be tested through controlled research. Its limitation is that it cannot rule out alternative explanations. Number 2 is correlational method. Do variable x and y vary together? Variables measured but not manipulated cannot determine cause and effect. Its evaluation is it is used widely because we often cannot manipulate risk variables or diagnosis in psychotherapy. Variables in correlational method are measured as they exist in nature. There is no independent variable that is manipulated. Psychopathologists usually rely on correlational methods when there are ethical reasons not to manipulate a variable. Next is the measuring correlation. Correlational coefficient varies from -1.0 to +1.0. Strength. The higher the absolute value, the stronger the relationship. Direction. Positive. Higher scores on variable x associated with higher scores on variable y. Negative. Higher scores on variable x associated with lower scores on variable y. The next topic is the correlational versus experimental studies. There's a picture in our study guide 4 that was posted that showing the process of the correlational studies and experimental studies. In correlational studies, first step is all participants complete the same measures. Second, the measures resent the life stresses. Third, measures the blood pressure of all the participants. Lastly, complete life stress and blood pressure. Next is experimental study. In this process, the first step is all participants are randomly assigned. Then, some are given speech in front of an audience and some seated quietly. Then, the participants' blood pressure were measured by the researcher or the experimenter. And lastly, compared blood pressure readings of the two groups, which has given two different tasks. Some participants are given speech in front of an audience and some are seated quietly. The first step in determining a correlation is to obtain pairs of observation of the two variables in question. Once such pairs of measurement is obtained, the strength of the relationship between the paired observation can be computed to determine the correlation coefficient R. Next is statistical and clinical significance. First is statistical significance. Probability is less than or equal to 0.05. A statistical correlation is unlikely to have occurred by chance, and a non-significant correlation may have occurred by chance also. So it does not provide evidence for an important relationship. A statistical finding is usually considered significant if the probability that is a chance finding is 5 less in 100, p less than 0.05. In general, as the absolute size of the correlation coefficient increases, the result is more likely to be statistically significant. The significance is also influenced by the number of the participants in your study or in the study. Next is the clinical significance. It is whether a relationship between variables is large enough to matter. Next is problems of causality. Correlation does not imply causality. Means that correlational method does not allow determination of cause and effect relationship. Directionality problem. Variable x may cause variable y. Variable y may cause also the variable x. The third variable problem. Variable z causes both variable x and variable y. One way of overcoming the directionality problem is based on the idea that causes must precede the effect. Next is longitudinal versus cross-sectional designs. Longitudinal design studies participants over time. The researchers test whether causes are present before a disorder has developed. Last is the cross-sectional design. It measures the causes and effects at the same time. Epidemiological research. Epidemiology. It is the study of the distribution of disorders in a population and possible correlates. 3 factors of a disorder. First is the prevalence. Prevalence. It is a proportion of people with disorder either currently or during their lifetime. Second is incidence. It is a proportion of people who develop new cases of the disorder in a year. Last is the risk factor. Risk factor. These are variables that are related to the likelihood of developing a disorder. Next is the experiment. It provides information about causal relationships, and it involves 3: the independent variable, random assignment, and dependent variable. The experiment can evaluate treatment effectiveness. It studies incidence, prevalence, and disorders. Examples of these are AIDS and trauma. Next is the basic feature of experimental design. Basic feature of experimental design. The investigator manipulates an independent variable. The participants are assigned to the conditions by random assignment. The researcher measures a dependent variable that is expected to vary conditions of the independent variable. Next is experimental effect. Experimental effect differences between conditions on the dependent variable. Internal validity. The extent to which experimental effect is due to the independent variable, not by the dependent variable. Control group. These are the participants who do not receive treatment at all. Standard against which treatment effectiveness is judged. Next is the placebo. Placebo is a change or improvement due to participants' expectations. Next is external validity. External validity is the extent to which results generalize beyond the study or on your study. Next is the analog experiment. Experiments not always possible in psychopathology. Ethical or practical constraints. Examine Examine related or similar behavior in the laboratory. Elicit stress, sadness, college students who tend to be anxious, or in animal research. Analog experiment is a structured experiment that compares the events of the two situations in order to look for correlations. For example, a researcher might look for a comparison between students with diagnosed ADHD and academic success in math class. Single subject experimental research. It examines how individual participants respond to the changes in the independent variable. It is a rigorous study of a single case over varied experimental condition and time, repeated measurement, evaluation of validity, variability, level and trend, and premium on internal validity. Integrating findings from multiple studies. Meta-analysis. Identify relevant size and compute effect size. It is useful for systematically integrating findings gleaned from individual studies and goes beyond the mere summarization and critique of research findings and etc. In general, meta-analysis represents a vast improvement over traditional methods of research review by providing a more thorough description of the current status of research in an area and a more precise estimate of the effects of treatments or interventions. Lastly, the Smith et al. 1980. A meta-analyzed 475 outcome studies, and the results, psychotherapy is effective. The National Comorbidity Survey Replication. It is a large-scale national survey and used structured interviews to collect information on the prevalence of several diagnoses. That's it. I hope that my discussion gave you an understanding in research methods in psychology. It may not be broad, but it comes from a humble heart. Studying this will help us in creating therapies in treating disorders. Hope you understand the noises surroundings. Thank you and God bless.